In the shadow of the painted mesa, they called her the Widowmaker. Not to her face, of course. No one with sense would risk catching Eliza Blackwood's steel-cold gaze. 3 men had tried to claim the bounty on her head last week. 2 were buried in shallow graves outside Redemption Creek, and the 3rd wouldn't walk right again. What the whispers never mentioned was how her hands trembled when she was alone, or how she sometimes woke screaming from dreams of the faces of those she'd hunted. But on this scorching afternoon, as Eliza rode into the dying town of Salvation's End, fate had something waiting that no amount of gunsmoke or reputation could shield her from. A boy with familiar eyes and a secret that would shatter everything. She thought she knew about revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun hung like a copper penny in the hazy sky as Eliza guided her dappled mare down the rutted main street. Salvation's End had been a mining boomtown once, before the silver veins ran dry. Now it was just another place where dreams came to die, perfect for someone like her who'd stopped dreaming years ago. "Water your horse, feed your soul," called a painted sign above the weathered trough outside Peterson's general store. Eliza dismounted with practiced ease, her boots raising small clouds of dust. Despite the heat, she kept her long black duster buttoned. The twin Remingtons beneath needed to remain hidden until necessary, but accessible in an instant. The elderly shopkeeper pretended not to recognize her as she entered, the bell above. The door announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle that seemed mockingly out of place. "Afternoon," he mumbled, eyes carefully avoiding the scar that traced from her left temple to the corner of her mouth. A parting gift from Jack, the gentleman Hargrove, the only mark he'd managed to leave on her before she'd put 2 bullets in his chest and collected her first major bounty. "Need supplies?" Eliza said, her voice low and surprisingly gentle for a woman who'd put more men in the ground than cholera. "Planning to be in the mountains for a spell." The shopkeeper nodded, still avoiding her gaze. "Hunting someone special?" A ghost of a smile touched Eliza's lips. "Always. For 5 years, she'd been tracking Thomas Caldwell, the man who'd murdered her husband and infant daughter while she was away tending to her dying mother. 5 years of cold trails and whispered rumors, of sleeping with one eye open, and her, finger on the trigger. The bounties she collected along the way were merely a means to an end, funding her relentless pursuit of the only kill that would ever matter. "Heard tell of a stranger passed through last week," the shopkeeper ventured, carefully measuring coffee beans into a paper sack. "Tall man, well-dressed, had a fancy gold watch, paid for everything with fresh minted coins." Eliza's pulse quickened, but her face betrayed nothing. Caldwell had robbed a bank in Tucson 3 months back. The description matched what witnesses had reported. "He alone?" she asked casually, examining a shelf of canned peaches as though they were the most interesting things in the world. "Had a boy with him. 10, maybe 12 years old, quiet little fella, looked half-starved." The shopkeeper tied the sack of coffee with a piece of twine. "Man said they were heading to the Murphy place out by Rattlesnake Creek." Eliza's hand paused on a tin of peaches. Caldwell didn't have a son. None that she'd ever heard of, anyway. But 5 years was a long time, and men like him tended to leave pieces of themselves scattered across the territories. "Murphy Place been abandoned for years," she said. "That's what I told him, but he just smiled, cold sort of smile that never touched his eyes, and said that suited him just fine." Eliza added jerky, beans, coffee, and ammunition to her pile of supplies. As the shopkeeper tallied her purchases, a commotion outside drew her attention. A group of men had gathered around the water trough, their voices raised in anger. "Filthy little thief!" one man shouted, his meaty hand gripping the collar of a skinny boy who couldn't have been more than 11. "Should cut your fingers off, teach you a proper lesson." The child twisted in the man's grasp, his face a mixture of terror and defiance. Something about his eyes, piercing blue even from this distance, made Eliza's chest tighten unexpectedly. "Excuse me," she said to the shopkeeper, leaving her supplies on the counter as she stepped outside. The afternoon heat hit her like a physical blow after the relative cool of the store. 4 men surrounded the boy, who had now gone still in his captor's grip, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal's. "Problem here?" Eliza asked, her voice carrying easily despite its softness. The men turned, irritation on their faces quickly replaced by uncertainty as they recognized her. The largest one, a cattle driver she'd seen in wanted posters for minor offenses, kept his grip on the boy. "None of your concern, Widowmaker," he said, though his voice held less conviction than his words. "This little rat tried to steal my wallet, just teaching him some manners." Eliza moved closer, her gait unhurried but purposeful. "Let me see him. Now look here." The subtle shift in her posture was all it took, that and the reputation that preceded her. The cattle driver released. The boy, who immediately scrambled backward, putting distance between himself and his tormentors. Eliza studied him, dirty, underfed, with a tangled mop of dark hair and those startling blue eyes. He wore clothes that had once been fine but were now torn and filthy. A small leather pouch hung from a string around his neck. "You steal from this man?" she asked. The boy directly. He stared back with a defiance that impressed her. "No, ma'am. Was just looking at his horse. Never seen one with spots like that before." "Liar!" The cattle driver spat, felt his hand in my pocket plain as day. Eliza's gaze never left the boy. "Where's your father, child?" Something flickered in those blue eyes. Fear, perhaps, or something deeper. "Don't have one," he said flatly. "He's with Caldwell." A new voice interjected. The shopkeeper had come to stand in the doorway of his store. "Saw them together last week. Man introduced him as his son." The boy's face went pale beneath the dirt. Before anyone could react, he bolted, darting between 2 of the men and racing down an alley between buildings. "Let him go," Eliza said, as the cattle driver made to follow. Her hand had moved imperceptibly closer to her hidden Remington. The man hesitated, clearly weighing his pride against the likelihood of leaving this confrontation alive if he challenged her. Pride lost. He spat in the dust near her boots, muttered something under his breath and stalked away, his companions following. Eliza returned to the store, paid for her supplies, and loaded them onto her mare. As she tightened the cinch on her saddle, she felt eyes on her. Glancing up, she spotted the boy watching her from the shadows between 2 buildings across the street. Instead of mounting, she led her horse to the water trough, giving the animal time to drink, while she leaned casually against a hitching post. From the corner of her eye, she saw the boy creep closer, curiosity apparently overcoming caution. "You know where the Murphy place is?" she asked, without looking directly at him. A pause, then, "Maybe. I'm heading that way. Could use a guide." She straightened, finally looking at him. "I'll feed you, and there's 2 bits in it for you when we get there." The boy's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" A question Eliza was asking herself. Perhaps it was those eyes, reminding her of someone she couldn't quite place. Or perhaps, after 5 years of dealing only in death, some buried part of her responded to this child's need. "Don't mistake business for charity, boy. I need to find the Murphy place. You know the way." Simple as that. He seemed to consider this, his gaze flicking between her face and the guns visible now as her duster flapped open in the hot breeze. "You gonna kill him?" he asked suddenly. The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Kill who?" "The man at Murphy's." "My—" He hesitated. Caldwell hesitated. So he wasn't claiming the man as his father. Interesting. "That depends on him," she answered honestly. "I intend to bring him in alive if possible, dead if necessary." The boy's face remained unreadable. Then he nodded once. Decision made. I'll take you, but I want to be gone before anything happens. Don't want to see it. Fair enough. Eliza reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a strip of jerky, offering it to him. What's your name? He took the jerky, tearing into it with the hunger of one who hadn't eaten properly in days. Samuel, he said between bites, but everyone calls me Sam. Well, Sam, I know who you are, he interrupted. You're Eliza Blackwood, the Widowmaker. His eyes held hers with an unsettling intensity. He said you might come. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. In that moment, Eliza knew she was potentially walking into a trap. Caldwell was expecting her, and yet something about this boy made her certain he wasn't simply bait. There was too much genuine hunger in him, too much wariness. Whatever game Caldwell was playing, Samuel wasn't a willing participant. Did he now? She said finally. And what else did he say about me? Sam looked away. That you wouldn't stop until one of you was dead. Eliza nodded slowly. On that, at least he wasn't lying. As they left Salvation's End behind, the boy riding double on her mare, Eliza felt a strange unease settle over her. For years, her path had been clear. Find Caldwell, make him pay for destroying her family. But now, with this child unexpectedly in the equation, the clarity was muddied. What she couldn't possibly know as they rode toward what would surely be a reckoning was that the truth waiting at the Murphy place would change everything she thought. She knew about revenge, about justice, and about the night her family died. Dusk painted the painted mesa in hues of blood and fire as Eliza and Samuel rode across the scrubland. The boy sat stiff-backed in front of her, his small frame tense against the gentle sway of the mare beneath them. Neither had spoken much since, leaving Salvation's End behind, each lost in private thoughts that seemed to stretch as vast as the desert surrounding them. How far? Eliza finally broke the silence, her breath stirring the boy's tangled hair. Samuel pointed toward a distant ridge where twisted junipers clawed at the darkening sky. Over there, creek runs behind those trees. Murphy's place sits in the hollow. Reining the mare toward the ridge, Eliza noticed how the boy's hands gripped the saddle horn, knuckles white with tension. You afraid of me, boy? She asked, keeping her tone neutral. Samuel didn't turn around. No. Then what's got you wound tighter than a $2 watch? A pause, then. He ain't what you think. Eliza felt a cold finger trace her spine. And what do I think? That he's a monster. Samuel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He saved me. The confession hung between them like gunsmoke after a firefight. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she bit back the automatic denial rising in her. Ill throat. 5 years of hate had taught her patience, if nothing else. Saved you from what? She asked instead. Samuel's shoulders hunched. My pa was a drunk. Beat me something fierce when the mood took him. One night he just wouldn't stop. Thought I was gonna die. His voice trembled slightly. Then Caldwell came. Shot Pa dead right there, took me away. Eliza digested this, the familiar image of Caldwell in her mind. A cold-blooded killer who'd murdered her husband and infant daughter in their sleep, clashing with this new information. Why'd he do that? She pressed. Caldwell ain't known for his charitable nature. The boy's response came so quietly she almost missed it. Said I reminded him of someone. Before she could probe further, the mare's ears pricked forward. In the same instant, Eliza spotted movement among the junipers ahead, a flicker of something metallic catching the last rays of sunlight. Down! She hissed, yanking Samuel backward as she kicked her feet free of the stirrups. They hit the ground hard as a rifle crack split the evening air, the bullet whistling through the space they'd occupied moments before. The mare bolted, dust billowing in her wake as Eliza dragged Samuel behind a large boulder, her Remingtons already in hand, "Friends of yours?" she growled, peering cautiously around the rock. Samuel's face had gone pale. "Not Caldwell's style. He'd have let us ride in." "Then who—" Another shot pinged off the boulder, sending rock splinters flying. "Bounty hunters," Samuel whispered, eyes wide. "Two men been tracking Caldwell for weeks. He's worth 5,000 to the Pinkerton agency." 5,000. The sum hung in the air between them. That was enough to tempt even the most cautious man. To risk facing the notorious Caldwell or the equally notorious Widowmaker. "Stay here," Eliza commanded, checking her guns. "Don't move till I call for you." Before Samuel could protest, she was gone, sliding away through the desert scrub with a grace that belied her deadly purpose. The boy pressed himself against the boulder, heart hammering in his chest as the sound of Eliza's movement faded. In the gathering darkness, Samuel clutched the leather pouch around his neck, fingers tracing the outline of the object inside. If Eliza knew what it contained, she'd kill him where he stood, just as she intended to kill Caldwell, just as everyone seemed intent on killing everyone else in this blood-soaked territory. 2 more shots rang out, followed by a strangled cry. Then silence descended, heavy and absolute. "Samuel," Eliza's voice came from somewhere to his right. "It's clear." He emerged cautiously from behind the boulder to find Eliza standing over 2 bodies. Both men wore the distinctive badges of Pinkerton, agents on their vests. One stared sightlessly at the darkening sky, a neat hole in his forehead. The other still gasped wetly, blood bubbling from a chest wound. "Please," the wounded man wheezed, reaching toward Eliza. "Mercy!" Without hesitation, she placed her Remington against his temple and pulled the trigger. Samuel flinched at the sound, but didn't look away. "You didn't have to kill him," he said flatly. Eliza holstered her weapon, her face unreadable in the fading light. "Chest wound like that, he was dead anyway, just would have taken longer." She whistled for her mare, who'd stopped 100 yards away and now trotted cautiously back. Besides, mercy's what he asked for. As she collected the reins, she noticed Samuel staring at the dead men. "First time seeing death up close," she asked. "Seeing death up close." The boy's laugh was hollow, far too old for his years. "No, ma'am, just wondering when it stops feeling like anything." Something twisted in Eliza's chest, recognition perhaps. She'd wondered the same thing, back when the blood on her hands was still fresh enough to keep her awake at night. "Mount up," she said, her voice gentler than she'd intended. "Won't do to be caught in the open if there's more coming." They rode hard through the moonlit desert, the mare's hooves kicking up dust that glittered like silver in the pale light. Samuel had fallen silent again, but the quality of it had changed. Less fearful tension, more contemplative quiet. When they finally reached the creek, Eliza dismounted, leading the mare to water before tying her to a juniper. The Murphy place was visible now, a ramshackle cabin with a sagging porch nestled in the hollow beyond. "No light," Samuel observed, standing beside her. "No," Eliza agreed, studying the cabin. "But someone's there." The boy's head snapped up. "How can you tell? Horse tracks fresh. And smoke lingered around the chimney when we rode up. Fire's been put out recent." She knelt, bringing herself to Samuel's eye level. "This is where we part ways, boy." "What?" "No!" Alarm flashed across his face. "I'm coming with you." "You said you didn't want to see what happens." Samuel's jaw set stubbornly. "Changed my mind." Eliza studied him, trying to decipher the desperation in his eyes. "Why? What aren't you telling me?" His hand went instinctively to the leather pouch around his neck. "I just need to be there." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eliza's gaze lingered on the pouch, but she didn't press him. "Fine, but you stay behind. Me, and if shooting starts, you find cover and stay there, understood?" Samuel nodded, relief washing over his features. They approached the cabin from downwind, moving silently through the shadows. Eliza's every sense was heightened, her body coiled like a spring. 5 years of hunting had led to this moment. The reckoning she'd dreamed of through countless cold nights. The porch steps didn't creak under her weight, a hunter's tread, careful and precise. She motioned for Samuel to wait as she pressed herself against the wall beside the door, listening. Silence from within, complete and undisturbed. Drawing one Remington, Eliza tested the door. Unlocked. It swung inward on surprisingly silent hinges, revealing darkness beyond. The smell hit her first, tobacco, whiskey, and beneath it, the metallic tang of blood. Lots of blood. "Stay," she mouthed to Samuel before slipping inside, gun raised. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, shapes emerged from the darkness. A table overturned, chairs scattered like abandoned soldiers across a battlefield, a lantern shattered on the floor, its oil creating a slick patch near the cold hearth, and a man slumped in the corner, head bowed as if in prayer or final surrender. Caldwell. Eliza breathed, the name both prayer and curse on her lips. The figure didn't move. Keeping, her gun trained on him, Eliza edged closer, fishing a match from her pocket with her free hand. She struck it against the wall, and flame blossomed, throwing gruesome shadows across the cabin's interior. Thomas Caldwell sat against the wall, his once fine clothes now stained dark with blood that had pooled beneath him. His hands lay open. In his lap, empty and still, the side of his head was a ruined mess, the exit wound of a bullet fired at close range. "No," Eliza whispered, the match trembling in her fingers. After 5 years of pursuit, after all the blood shed and lives taken along the way, to find him like this, already dead by another's hand. "No!" The match burned down to her fingertips. She hardly felt the sting, letting it fall to the floor, where it sputtered out against the blood-stained boards. Samuel's small voice came from the doorway. "Eliza, stay back," she ordered, her voice raw. "He's dead." The boy didn't obey. His footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then rushing forward. "No, no, no," he cried, falling to his knees beside Caldwell's body. The genuine grief in his voice pierced through Eliza's own shock. She lit another match, illuminating Samuel's tear-streaked face as he clutched at Caldwell's bloodied shirt. "You knew this would happen," Eliza said, realization dawning. "You knew he was already dead. That's why you agreed to bring me here." Samuel looked up, his blue eyes swimming with tears. I hoped," he choked. "I heard the shots last night, but I ran. I was scared. I thought maybe—" "You thought I could help him?" Eliza laughed bitterly. "Boy, I came here to kill him." Samuel's gaze hardened despite his tears. "No, you came for the truth. That's what he always said you were really hunting." The match burned out, plunging them back into darkness. Eliza fumbled. For another, struck it, and moved to a shelf where an oil lamp sat. She lit it, flooding the cabin with steady golden light that did nothing to soften the grim tableau before her. "What truth?" she demanded, turning back to Samuel. The boy's hand went to the leather pouch around his neck. With trembling fingers, he pulled it open and withdrew something small that glinted in the lamplight, a locket. Gold, with an intricate flower design etched on its surface. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her gun hand. Dropping to her side, Samuel held it out to her. "He gave it to me, said it would prove everything when the time came." With unsteady fingers, Eliza took the locket. It was warm from being pressed against the boy's skin. The same locket she'd last seen around her infant daughter's neck, the night before she'd left to tend to her dying mother, the night before she'd returned to find her family slaughtered and her home burned to ashes. She pressed the tiny catch and the locket sprang open. Inside, a miniature portrait of herself looked. back younger, smiling, without the scar that now marked her face. And beside it, a lock of fine baby hair, golden as sunrise. He didn't kill them, Samuel said quietly. That's what he wanted you to know. Eliza's legs gave way beneath her. She sank to the floor, the locket clutched in her hand like a lifeline. In a storm-tossed sea. Then who? She managed, her voice barely audible. From the doorway, a new voice answered, cold and amused and terribly familiar. I did. Eliza's head snapped up to see a silhouette filling the cabin door, backlit by moonlight. The newcomer stepped inside, boots leaving bloody prints on the floor. Hello, sister, said Amelia Blackwood, a rifle cradled casually in her arms. It's been a long time. It's been a long time. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, Eliza stared at the apparition in the doorway. Amelia, her sister, her flesh and blood, looked like a stranger now. The sweet-faced girl who'd wept at their mother's bedside was gone, replaced by this hard-eyed woman whose smile never reached her eyes. You're dead, Eliza whispered, her fingers tightening around the locket. They found your body in the river 3 days after Mother died. Amelia's laugh was like broken glass. They found a body. Poor girl had my shawl, my ring. Amazing what people see when they expect to see it. She stepped further into the cabin, her rifle barrel never wavering from Eliza's chest. You always were too eager to believe whatever tale was easiest, Lizzie. The childhood nickname cut deeper than any knife. Eliza's gaze flicked to her Remington, lying useless on the floor where she'd dropped it in shock. Don't, Amelia warned, noticing the glance. I've waited too long for this moment to have it end so quickly. Samuel had gone completely still beside. Caldwell's body, his eyes darting between the sisters. Understanding dawned on his face as he took in Amelia's features, so similar to Eliza's, yet twisted with something cold and calculating. Why? Eliza's voice cracked on the single word, encompassing 5 years of nightmares, of grief so profound it had reshaped her into someone she barely recognized. Why? Amelia mocked, circling the room like a predator. Why kill your precious James and that squalling brat? Or why frame poor Thomas here? She nudged Caldwell's boot with her own. All of it. Amelia's expression hardened. Because you took everything from me, always. Mother's love, father's pride. Her knuckles whitened on the rifle. James! The accusation hung in the air, nonsensical and devastating. James was never yours, Eliza said slowly, trying to make sense of this twisted revelation. You barely knew him. I knew him before you did. Amelia's composure cracked momentarily, raw fury bleeding through. We were promised to each other since childhood. Our fathers had an agreement. But then you came home from that fancy Eastern school, and suddenly James couldn't see anyone else. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. James had never mentioned a prior arrangement, but he'd been reluctant to discuss his past with Amelia at all. Now Eliza understood why. That doesn't explain. 5 years I waited, Amelia continued as if Eliza hadn't spoken. Bided my time. While you played happy family. Then Mother fell ill and finally I saw my chance. Samuel had begun inching away from Caldwell's body, moving slowly toward a fallen chair. Amelia didn't seem to notice, lost in her litany of perceived wrongs. I waited until you left for Mother's sickbed. James was so trusting, so pleased to see me offering comfort in your absence. Her smile was a ghastly thing. He never suspected. A thing until I put the knife in his heart. Eliza felt bile rise in her throat, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint. The sister she'd mourned, the sister she'd loved, had slaughtered her family while she sat vigil at their mother's deathbed. The baby, she forced out. My daughter. Something flickered across Amelia's face, not remorse exactly, but a momentary hesitation. She was yours, she said flatly, as if that explained everything. Your blood, your legacy. There could be nothing left of you, don't you see? Nothing for you to come back to. And Caldwell? Why frame him? Amelia's smile returned. Thomas was James's oldest friend. He discovered what I'd done, caught me standing over their bodies, but he was too noble to kill a woman, especially one he thought was half mad with grief. She glanced contemptuously at Caldwell's corpse. Instead, he grabbed what evidence he could and ran, thinking if he led you away from Redemption Creek, you'd be safe from me. The locket, Eliza murmured, understanding dawning. He took it to prove that it wasn't him, Samuel finished, finding his voice at last. He knew nobody would believe him over your sister, not with her playing the grieving aunt. So he ran, let everyone think he was guilty. Amelia's attention snapped to the boy, as if truly noticing him for the first time. And what would you know about it, brat? He told me everything, Samuel said, his voice stronger now. How you hunted him all these years. How you hired guns to make it look like he was still robbing and killing, building his reputation as an outlaw while the real Caldwell was in hiding. He knew you were playing both sides, feeding Eliza information through your network of spies. While pretending to be dead, Eliza stared at the boy, realization crashing over her like ice water. You're not Caldwell's son, not Caldwell's son. Samuel shook his head, his gaze never leaving Amelia. No, I'm yours. The world seemed to stop turning. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the boy's face, at the familiar blue eyes, the shape of his chin, the set of his jaw, features she'd seen in her husband, in the infant daughter she thought she'd lost. That's not possible, she whispered. My baby died. I buried her. You buried someone's child, Samuel corrected grimly. Not yours. Amelia's laugh was brittle. Clever boy. Caldwell must have told you that little fairy tale. But my sister buried her brat. I watched her do it. You buried a doll wrapped in blankets, Samuel countered. Thomas switched the baby before you could kill her, hid her with a wet nurse in juice on, while he led you both away. Eliza's mind reeled. She remembered the small coffin so light in her arms, how the preacher had stopped her from opening it one last time, citing her fragile state, the way she'd been too numb, too shattered to insist. But my daughter, she began, was a son, Samuel said simply. The midwife who delivered me told. Thomas, but you were so fevered after the birth they waited to tell you. Then everything happened. The rifle in Amelia's hands trembled slightly. Lies, she hissed. All lies. But Eliza saw the truth written in Samuel's face, in the familiar stubborn set of his jaw, James's jaw, in the eyes that mirrored her own. Her son, alive. The knowledge crashed through her like wildfire, burning away 5 years of grief and rage, and purposeless vengeance, leaving behind something she'd thought long dead, hope. He kept me safe all these years, Samuel continued, moving from town to town, staying one step ahead of her bounty hunters. But he knew eventually she'd find us. His voice caught. Last night she finally did. Amelia's smile turned vicious. And I'd have had you too, if you hadn't run like the coward you are. Fitting that you led your mother straight to me, though. Saves me the trouble of hunting her. Down next. Eliza's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. Her Remington lay on the floor 3 feet away. Amelia's rifle was trained on her chest. Samuel stood by Caldwell's body, close to the overturned table. The Pinkerton men, Eliza said, stalling for time. They weren't after Caldwell. They were yours. I have many men in many places, Amelia admitted. The bounty on Caldwell's head was a convenient fiction, just like the rewards on all those other outlaws you've hunted these past 5 years. Her smile widened. Did you never wonder why your quarry always seemed to cross your path at just the right moment? I've been leading you by the nose, sister. Dear. Every man you killed was one I wanted dead. The revelation struck Eliza like a physical blow. All those men she'd hunted down, believing them to be hardened criminals, pawns in her sister's twisted game. Why not just kill me yourself? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Why the elaborate charade? Amelia's eyes gleamed with malice. And miss watching you destroy yourself, become the very monster you thought you were hunting. She shook her head. No, Lizzie, I wanted you to suffer, to lose your soul piece by piece, kill by kill, and you performed beautifully. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. The great Widowmaker. If only they knew the truth, that everything you've done has served my purpose, not yours. Samuel moved infinitesimally closer to the table, his hand reaching for something beneath it. Eliza needed to keep Amelia talking, keep her attention fixed away from the boy. And now? She asked. Now that I know the truth? Now? Amelia shrugged. Now you die. The boy dies, and I return to my life, the one that should have been mine all along. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Goodbye, sister. Everything happened at once. Samuel lunged for whatever lay beneath the table. Eliza threw herself sideways as the rifle cracked, its bullet splintering the floorboards where she'd been kneeling. Her hand closed around the Remington, bringing it up in one fluid motion, born of years of practice. But before either sister could fire again, a new sound split the night, the metallic click of a revolver's hammer being cocked. Drop it, Amelia. Marshal. Robert Holloway stood in the doorway, his weathered face grim in the lamplight. Behind him, 2 deputies had their weapons trained on Amelia. This doesn't concern you, Marshal, Amelia snarled, her rifle still aimed at Eliza. 5 years of orchestrated killings across 3 territories concerns me plenty, Holloway replied evenly. As does the murder of Thomas Caldwell, a man who's been secretly feeding information to my office for months. His gaze flickered to the dead man in the corner. He knew you'd find him eventually. Made sure we'd find you too. Understanding dawned on Eliza's face. The tracks leading to the cabin, the fresh horse signs. Caldwell had left a trail for the law to follow, even as he drew Amelia in for their final confrontation. Amelia's eyes darted around the room, calculating her odds. In that moment of distraction, Samuel's hand emerged from beneath the table, clutching Caldwell's revolver. Before anyone could react, he fired. The shot went wide, striking the wall behind Amelia. But it was enough to startle her, to throw off her aim as she swung back toward Eliza. Eliza didn't hesitate. Her Remington barked once, the sound deafening in the confined space. Amelia staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing her face, as she glanced down at the spreading crimson stain on her chest. You always were the better shot, she murmured, a strange smile touching her lips as she crumpled to the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then Samuel dropped the gun and ran too, Eliza flinging himself into her arms with such force that she nearly toppled backward. She caught him, held him, this miracle she'd never dared hope for, as 5 years of grief and rage and vengeance dissolved into tears that soaked his tangled hair. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." Over Samuel's shoulder, her eyes met Marshal Holloway's. The lawman nodded once, understanding in his gaze. He holstered his weapon and motioned for his deputies to lower theirs. "We've been tracking your sister's operation for over a year," he said quietly. "Caldwell reached out to us 6 months ago, offered to help bring her down. Said there was someone she'd hurt worse than anyone, someone who deserved to know the truth." His gaze lingered on Samuel. "We didn't know about the boy. Caldwell kept that close to his chest until the end." Eliza held Samuel tighter, feeling his heartbeat against hers, proof of life, of continuity, of a future she'd thought forever denied. "Her? What happens now?" she asked, her voice rough with emotion. Holloway gestured to Amelia's still form. "She's left a web of crime across half the West. We'll be untangling it for years." He hesitated. "The men you tracked down will need to sort through which were genuinely guilty and which were her pawns." The weight of it pressed down on Eliza. All the blood on her hands, some deserved, some not. The lives she'd taken in pursuit of a vengeance built on lies. And me, she asked, will I hang for what I've done? Samuel stiffened in her arms, but Holloway shook his head. Caldwell left affidavits detailing everything. How Amelia manipulated you, used your grief to turn you into her personal executioner. Most of the men you brought in were wanted anyway, even if not for the crimes she led you to believe. The lawman's weathered face softened slightly. The courts will sort it out, but I reckon you've served enough time in a prison of her making. As the deputies removed Amelia's body, as Holloway covered Caldwell with a blanket taken from the cabins, single bed, Eliza and Samuel remained kneeling on the floor, locked in an embrace neither seemed willing to break. He died protecting me, Samuel murmured against her shoulder. He knew she was coming, sent me to town to find you, said it was time for the truth to come out, one way or another. Eliza stroked his hair, marveling at the solid reality of him. Did he tell you about me? Samuel nodded. Stories, every night, how brave you were, how kind, before everything happened. He pulled back slightly, studying her face with solemn eyes. He said when we found you, I'd know what to do. That underneath everything, you were still the same woman who'd walk miles to help a neighbor, who'd share her last crust of bread with a stranger. The faith of a dead man and the hope in her son's eyes were almost more than Eliza could bear. The Widowmaker had no place in this new reality, but perhaps somewhere beneath the layers of grief and rage that had defined her for so long, Eliza Blackwood still existed. The woman she'd been before, the mother this child deserved. I don't know if that woman still exists, she admitted, her voice breaking, but I want to find out, if you'll help me. Samuel's smile, so like James's it made her heart ache, was all the answer she needed. In the blood-soaked cabin where one chapter of her life had ended, another had impossibly begun. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the painted mesa, washing the world in gold. A new day, a second chance, and, for the first time in 5 long years, Eliza Blackwood stepped toward it, not seeking death, but embracing life. But dawn bled across the horizon as they rode away from the Murphy place, leaving behind the cabin that had witnessed both the death of Eliza's past and the birth of her future. Samuel sat before her on the saddle, no longer tense, but exhausted, occasionally drooping against her until she adjusted her arm around his middle to keep him steady. Marshal Holloway rode beside them, his weathered face giving away nothing of his thoughts. His deputies had stayed behind to deal with the bodies, Amelia's to be transported back to Salvation's End, Caldwell's to receive a proper burial on the ridge overlooking the creek, as Samuel had quietly requested. He should see the sunrise, the boy had said simply. He always got up early to watch it. The unexpected tenderness of the request had pierced Eliza's heart. This child, her child, had spent 5 years with a man she'd hunted relentlessly, believing him a monster. While she'd built her life around revenge, Caldwell had built his around protection. The weight of that truth pressed down on her, simultaneously crushing and freeing. We'll need formal statements, Holloway broke the silence as they approached the outskirts of town. Both of you. Eliza nodded, too wrung out for words. The lawman studied her face, then continued. Judge Parsons arrives next week for circuit court. He's a fair man. Once he reviews Caldwell's evidence and your testimony. He left the sentence, unfinished, the implication clear. Her fate hung in the balance, but the scales might yet tip in her favor. And the boy? She asked, her voice rough with exhaustion. Samuel stays with you, lest you don't want him to, Holloway replied simply. The child stiffened in her arms, suddenly alert. Eliza's throat constricted at the realization that Samuel feared rejection, feared she might not want this sudden responsibility, this living reminder of everything she'd lost and found again. He stays with me, she said firmly, feeling Samuel relax against her once more. They parted ways at the edge of town, Holloway heading toward the jailhouse, while Eliza guided her mare toward the modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Cutler. As they dismounted, Samuel swayed on his feet, dark circles shadowing his eyes. "When did you last sleep?" Eliza asked, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. He shrugged. Before it happened. 2 days then. 2 days of fear and running and grief." Eliza felt a surge of protective ferocity that startled her with its intensity. She'd forgotten this feeling, the mama bear instinct that had briefly flared when she'd held her newborn before being consumed by childbed fever. Food first, she decided, guiding him toward the boarding house's side entrance. Then rest. Mrs. Cutler, bless her, asked no questions when confronted with the notorious widowmaker and a half-starved boy at her kitchen door, just as the early morning light slanted through her windows. She simply set before them a feast of biscuits, gravy, eggs, and coffee, milk for Samuel, then discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone with their hunger and fatigue. Samuel ate ravenously, then mechanically, his eyes growing heavier with each bite until he nearly face-planted in his plate. Eliza gently guided him upstairs to her rented room, where he collapsed onto the narrow bed, asleep before his head touched the pillow. She sat beside him, studying his face in the strengthening daylight. Now that she knew to look, the resemblances were unmistakable. James's stubborn chin, her own high cheekbones, her father's earlobes. How had she not seen it immediately? The answer came with painful clarity, because she'd trained herself to see only what served her vengeance. Everything else had been irrelevant. "I'll do better," she whispered, carefully brushing hair from his forehead. "I swear it." While Samuel slept, Eliza confronted the practical matters at hand. She visited the bathhouse, scrubbing away the blood and dust of the previous night. She purchased a new shirt to replace her bullet-torn one, and finally, reluctantly, she made her way to the jailhouse to give her statement to Marshal Holloway. The lawman listened without interruption as she recounted the events at the Murphy place. When she finished, he pushed a stack of papers across his desk, Caldwell's sworn affidavits detailing Amelia's crimes and the elaborate deception that had turned Eliza into an unwitting assassin. "Read them," Holloway advised. "All of them. You deserve to know the whole truth." Hours later, she emerged from the jailhouse, her mind reeling from revelations, both heartbreaking and liberating. Caldwell had documented everything meticulously. Amelia's network of informants, the falsified, wanted posters, the real criminals hidden among the innocent men Eliza had been manipulated into hunting. Most precious of all were the early pages, describing how he'd discovered Amelia standing over James's body, how he'd managed to spirit away the infant Samuel before she returned to finish what she'd started. "I could not save James," Caldwell had written in a careful, educated hand, "but I swore upon his body that his son would live, even if it meant my reputation and ultimately my life would be forfeit." Back at the boarding house, Eliza found Samuel awake and sitting by the window, watching the street below with wary eyes that had seen too much for his tender years. "You read everything?" he asked without turning. "Yes." Eliza settled into the chair opposite him. "How did you know?" Now he looked at her, his gaze direct and unsettlingly adult. "Your face. It's different now." She didn't ask what he meant. She could feel the change herself, like clay remolded by knowing hands, her features settling into something that felt both foreign and familiar. "Did he?" She hesitated, uncertain how to frame the question burning in her heart. "Thomas, did he speak of me often?" Samuel's expression softened slightly. "Every day, even when I was too young to understand, he'd tell me stories. How you could shoot a flying bird at 50 paces, how you danced at village gatherings like you had music in your bones, how you laughed." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I used to try to picture it. You laughing. The simple confession struck Eliza like a physical blow. When had she last laughed with genuine joy? Before James died. Before her world ended and this new, harder one began. He never wanted me to fear you, Samuel continued. Even when we heard the stories about the Widowmaker, he'd say, "That's not her. That's what grief made her, but underneath, your mother is still there." His eyes, so like her own, searched her face. Was he right? The question hung between them, impossible and essential. Eliza reached into her pocket and withdrew the locket, its gold surface catching the afternoon light. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice rough with honesty, "but I want him to be." Samuel nodded, accepting this partial answer. He watched as she carefully opened the locket, revealing the miniature portrait and lock of baby hair. "That was mine?" he asked, touching the golden curl. "Yes." Eliza swallowed past the tightness in her throat. "Your grandmother, my mother, cut it the day you were born. Said every child should leave something of themselves in their family's keeping, in case—" She couldn't finish. "In case they died," Samuel completed, matter of fact. He'd clearly learned early that death was capricious and ever-present. "When I thought I'd lost you," Eliza said carefully, "this was all I had left. I wore it until the day I buried what I thought was you. Then I couldn't bear it anymore, and Caldwell took it, to prove his innocence, if the day ever came." She closed the locket gently. "And to give back to you, when you were old enough to understand." Samuel's chin quivered slightly, then firmed. "He said, when I found you, I should give it back. That it belonged with my mother." Eliza shook her head, pressing the locket into his small hand. "It belongs with you now. A reminder of where you came from, of who loved you enough to die protecting you." His fingers closed around it, knuckles whitening, with the strength of his grip. For a moment, Eliza thought he might cry. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and met her gaze directly. "So what happens now?" The question echoed her own from the cabin, but with a different weight behind it. Outside, Salvation's End continued, its dusty existence oblivious to the seismic shift occurring in the small boarding house room. Horses clopped down the main street, someone laughed in a saloon. Life persisted, heedless of individual suffering or redemption. "Now," Eliza said carefully, "we wait for the judge, and then, if he's merciful, we figure it out. Together." "Together," Samuel repeated, testing the word like an unfamiliar food. On his tongue, the afternoon stretched between them, filled with awkward starts and stops as they tentatively explored this new reality. Samuel asked about his father, hungry for details Caldwell couldn't provide. Eliza described James's laugh, his terrible singing voice, his gift for training horses no one else could tame. With each memory shared, something calcified within her, softened incrementally. As evening approached, Mrs. Cutler brought up a tray with supper, rabbit stew, cornbread, and tart apple cobbler for dessert. They ate in companionable silence, both too weary for more emotional excavation. When Samuel's eyelids began to droop again, Eliza gently urged him back to bed. He went without protest, but as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Will you stay?" he asked, suddenly sounding his age. "Just nearby." Eliza's throat tightened. "Of course." She settled into the room's single chair, prepared for an uncomfortable night. Samuel watched her through half-lidded eyes. "Caldwell used to tell me stories," he murmured, already drifting. "When the dreams were bad." Eliza hesitated, then drew a deep breath. "Once," she began softly, "there was a brave knight who protected a young prince from a wicked sorceress." She spun the tale as darkness claimed the town, transforming Caldwell's sacrifice into a hero's journey that Samuel could carry with him into sleep. When his breathing finally deepened and evened out, she continued the story anyway, as much for herself as for him. Near midnight, a soft knock at the door startled her from a light doze. She opened it to find Marshal Holloway, his expression grave in the hallway's dim lamplight. "Word just arrived from Carson City," he said without preamble. "Amelia wasn't working alone." Eliza's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Her network was bigger than we thought. And they're coming. For you, for the boy, for Caldwell's evidence." He glanced past her to Samuel's sleeping form. "You need to leave. Tonight." "Where?" Eliza demanded, keeping her voice low. "If her people are as connected as you say—" "North," Holloway interrupted. "I have a friend who runs a ranch in Wyoming territory. Remote, safe." He pressed a folded paper into her hand. "Directions and a letter of introduction. There's a stage. Leaving in an hour." Eliza wanted to argue, to insist she could protect Samuel here, but the memory of Amelia's cold smile stopped her. Her sister might be dead, but her poisonous legacy lived on in those she'd corrupted, and they would show no mercy to the child who had witnessed their leader's downfall. "Give us 10 minutes, she said, already turning to wake Samuel. The boy blinked groggily as she explained the situation, but his response came with the pragmatism of one accustomed to midnight flights. "I can be ready in 5, he said simply, reaching for his boots. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered, like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Holloway escorted them to the waiting stagecoach, its team already stamping impatiently in the pre-journey darkness. "What about the judge?" "My testimony?" Eliza asked as the driver loaded their meager belongings. Holloway's weathered face creased with a grim smile. "I'll explain the circumstances. Parsons is understanding about witnesses who need to relocate for their safety." He handed her a small leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. "Caldwell left this with his affidavits. Said it rightfully belonged to the boy." Samuel took the pouch, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "He saved money for me?" "For both of you," Holloway corrected. "For this exact situation. He always knew it might come to running." The stagecoach driver called for boarding. Eliza hesitated, suddenly reluctant to leave, not because Salvation's End held anything worth staying for, but because departure meant truly accepting this new path, this unfamiliar future where vengeance had no place. "It's all right to be afraid," Samuel said quietly, surprising her with his perception. "Caldwell said starting over is always scary, even when it's necessary." The simple wisdom of it, passed from a dead man through the child who should have been, a stranger but somehow wasn't, steadied her. Eliza took Samuel's hand, and together they climbed into the stagecoach. "Remember," Holloway said through the open window, "Caldwell's papers are with Judge Parsons now. The truth is out there, even if you're not." As the stagecoach lurched forward, beginning its journey into uncertainty, Eliza felt Samuel's hand squeeze hers in the darkness. Neither spoke as the last lights of Salvation's End receded behind them. They were strangers still in many ways, this mother and son reunited through blood and tragedy. But as the moon tracked across the sky above their northbound coach, as Samuel gradually leaned against her shoulder in sleep, Eliza recognized the fragile beginning of something she'd thought forever lost to her. Hope, not the desperate bargaining kind that had sustained her through the first days after losing her family, not the vengeance-fueled determination that had driven her to become the Widowmaker. This was quieter, steadier, a pilot light rather than a conflagration. The road ahead would not be easy. Amelia's conspirators would not give up quickly. The weight of innocent blood on Eliza's hands would not wash away overnight. But for the first time in 5 years, she was moving toward something rather than away from tragedy. As the stagecoach, rolled through the night, eating up miles of dusty road beneath its wheels, Eliza stroked her son's hair and allowed herself to imagine a future beyond revenge, a future where perhaps she might one day learn to laugh again, and somewhere in the darkness she thought she felt James smiling. 3 days on a jolting stagecoach had taught Eliza things about her son that no conversation could have revealed. Samuel slept with one hand always near his pocket, where he kept the locket. He preferred the window seat, but never complained when other passengers crowded him away from it. He watched strangers with the careful assessment of someone who'd learned early that threat assessment was a survival skill. And despite years on the run, he still maintained a core of kindness that emerged in unexpected moments, sharing his jerky with a hungry child at a way station, helping an elderly woman down from the coach when the driver was too impatient to assist. The Wyoming Territory spread before them like a half-tamed dream. Valleys carved by glaciers 1,000 years dead, mountains that clawed at the sky, forests so dense they seemed to swallow light. As the stage wound through a mountain pass, Samuel pressed his face to the window, wonder temporarily overriding his habitual caution. "It's so green," he breathed, fog from his mouth ghosting the glass. Eliza understood his awe. After years in the dust and scrub of Arizona Territory, the lushness here seemed almost indecent. A paintbox spilled across the landscape. "Caldwell promised we'd come north someday," Samuel continued, not looking away from the view. "Said there were places where water fell from the sky so often you'd never worry about your crops failing." I thought he was spinning tales. The casual mention of Caldwell no longer provoked a surge of bitter hatred in Eliza's chest. Instead, each new revelation about the man who'd protected her son filled in another piece of the puzzle. Sketching the portrait of someone who'd sacrificed everything to keep a promise. "He ever tell you about your granddad's apple orchard?" she asked, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. "Back in Pennsylvania." Samuel turned from the window, surprise and hunger for connection plain on his face. "No. Did we have apple trees?" "Hundreds. Your father grew up climbing them. Used to say he could tell which variety a tree was just by the feel of the bark." The recollection flowed easier than she expected, sweet rather than painful. "First time I met him, he brought me an apple, said he'd picked the perfect one just for me." "Was it perfect?" Eliza smiled, the expression still feeling foreign on her face. "Wormiest thing I ever saw. He was so embarrassed he couldn't look at me for a week." Samuel's answering smile transformed his solemn face. For a heartbeat, Eliza glimpsed the child he might have been without the weight of secrecy and danger, the boy who should have grown up climbing trees and playing tag instead of learning to spot bounty hunters in a crowded saloon. The stagecoach rounded a bend, revealing a valley cradled between two mountain ranges. A river snaked through its center, silver in the afternoon light. Nestled against the eastern slope stood a cluster of buildings surrounding a large ranch house, smoke curling from its chimney. "Raven Creek Ranch," the driver announced, beginning the descent into the valley. "End of the line, folks." Anticipation and anxiety twisted in Eliza's gut as they approached. Marshall Holloway had assured her his friend Nathaniel Harker could be trusted, that the remote ranch would provide safe harbor while they determined their next steps. But trust came harder to her now than drawing her Remingtons ever had. Samuel seemed to sense her unease. "We don't have to stay," he said quietly, "if it doesn't feel right." The simple acknowledgement that they were in this together, that decisions would be made as a unit, steadied her. "We'll see," she replied. "Judge it when we get there." Raven Creek Ranch grew more impressive as they drew closer. Unlike the ramshackle spreads common in the territories, this operation spoke of careful planning and prosperity, Fenced pastures contained horses of exceptional quality. Outbuildings stood freshly painted and well-maintained. Farmhands moved with the relaxed efficiency of men who were treated fairly and paid on time. The stagecoach pulled up before the main house, a two-story structure built of local stone and timber. As Eliza and Samuel descended, stiff from days of travel, the front door opened to reveal a mountain of a man with a silver-shot beard and the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent decades under open sky. "You'd be Holloway's friends," he said without preamble, his voice deep and gravelled but not unkind. "Been expecting you. I'm Nathaniel Harker." Eliza tensed, her hand instinctively moving toward her hidden Remington. Anyone who recognized them on sight was a potential threat. Harker noticed the movement and raised his palms in a placating gesture. "Telegraph arrived yesterday. Said to expect a woman and boy on today's stage." His shrewd eyes assessed them both. "Didn't mention names, just that you needed a place to lie low for a spell." Some of the tension eased from Eliza's shoulders. Holloway had been cautious then. "Good. I appreciate the welcome," she said carefully. "But we wouldn't want to impose—" "Nonsense." Harker waved away her protest. "Any friend of Bob Holloway's is welcome here. Man saved my life during the war." He gestured toward the house. "Come in. Martha's got supper nearly ready and you both look like you could use a proper meal." Samuel glanced up at Eliza, silently deferring to her judgment. She hesitated, then gave a slight nod. If this was a trap, it was an elaborate one. And they had nowhere else to go. Martha Harker proved to be as formidable as her husband, though in a different way. Small and wiry, with intelligent eyes and capable hands, she welcomed them without prying questions, showing them to adjoining rooms on the second floor before ushering them to a dining room where a feast awaited. "Eat," she commanded simply. "Questions can wait." They obeyed, too hungry to resist. Samuel ate with the focused intensity of a child who'd known scarcity, though his manners remained impeccable, another testament to Caldwell's care. Eliza found herself watching him surreptitiously, cataloguing each expression, each gesture, trying to reconcile this living, breathing boy with the infant she'd lost. Later, with Samuel tucked into bed in his own room, the first privacy he'd known in years, Eliza joined the Harkers in their study. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, pushing back the mountain chill that descended with nightfall. "Bob's letter said you needed sanctuary," Nathaniel said, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey and passing one to Eliza. "Said it might not be safe for you to stay in one place for long." "That's right." Eliza sipped the whiskey, letting its warmth steady her. "It's a complicated situation." "Complicated usually means dangerous in my experience," Martha observed, settling into an armchair. "And dangerous usually involves people hunting other people." The bluntness of the assessment startled a wry smile from Eliza. "You're not wrong. We don't need details," Nathaniel assured her. "But if we're harboring you, we ought to know what kind of trouble might come calling." "Fair enough." Eliza chose her words carefully, providing the essential facts without unnecessary elaboration. The Harkers listened without interruption as she explained Amelia's betrayal, Caldwell's sacrifice, and the network of criminals that might still be searching for them. When she finished, Martha shook her head slowly. "That poor child," she murmured, "to live with such uncertainty all these years." Eliza's throat tightened. "He's stronger than he should have to be." "Children adapt," Nathaniel said, his voice gentler than his imposing presence suggested. "But they shouldn't have to." He refilled their glasses. "You're welcome here as long as necessary. Ranch this size, 2 more faces won't draw attention. We're far enough from anywhere that strangers stand out. Gives us plenty of warning if anyone comes looking." "I can work," Eliza offered. "I won't." "Be a charity case." Martha's laugh held no mockery. "Holloway mentioned you were proud. Don't worry, we've plenty that needs doing. Winter's coming, and extra hands are always welcome." She studied Eliza with shrewd eyes. The boy needs stability, time to be a child. Can you give him that? The question struck at the heart of Eliza's deepest fear, that she was too damaged, too defined by vengeance to be the mother Samuel deserved. That the Widowmaker had consumed Eliza Blackwood so completely there was nothing nurturing left. "I want to," she answered honestly. "I'm trying to." Martha nodded, apparently satisfied. "That's all any parent can do. The rest comes with time." That night, lying awake in the first real bed she'd known in weeks, Eliza listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through pine trees, the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness, so different from the desert nights she'd grown accustomed to, so different from the life she'd built around retribution. A soft knock at her door roused her from contemplation. She reached for her Remington automatically before recognizing Samuel's distinctive pattern. 2 quick taps, a pause, then 1 more. "Come in," she called softly. He appeared in the doorway, a shadow against the darker hallway, clutching a quilt around his shoulders. "Bad dreams?" she asked, sitting up. He nodded, hesitating at the threshold, clearly uncertain of his welcome. Eliza felt a pang, remembering how her own mother had always left her door open, making clear that nightmares could always find comfort there. "Come here," she said, patting the edge of the bed. Samuel padded across the room and perched beside her, his small body radiating tension. "Want to talk about it?" she asked, resisting the urge to pull him close. She'd lost the right to assume such intimacy, she knew. It would have to be earned back. He stared at his hands, twisting the quilt between his fingers. "It was about the night Caldwell died, but different." His voice dropped to a whisper. "This time, she killed me too." Eliza's heart contracted painfully. "Amelia?" He nodded, a single jerky movement, "and I couldn't warn him, couldn't run for help, just had to watch." A tremor ran through him. It felt so real. Dreams often do. Eliza chose her words with care. "Especially after we've seen things no one should have to see. Do you have them too?" His gaze lifted to hers, seeking connection through shared pain. Eliza could have lied, could have presented a strong front to protect him, but Samuel had survived this long on truth, however harsh. He deserved nothing less from her. "Every night," she admitted. "For 5 years, different nightmares, but all cut from the same cloth. Death, loss, failure." She drew a steadying breath. But tonight was different. Samuel leaned slightly closer, drawn by the shift in her tone. "How?" "I dreamed of your father. Not his death, just him, alive, sitting under the apple trees back home. The memory dream had been so vivid she'd woken expecting to smell orchard blossoms. It wasn't sad, it just was." "Maybe that's progress," Samuel suggested, wisdom beyond his years shining through. "Caldwell said healing isn't about forgetting the wounds, but about them hurting less when you touch them." Eliza blinked back sudden moisture. How many such conversations had her son had with the man she'd hunted? How much wisdom had passed between them during long nights on the run? "He was right about a lot of things," she acknowledged. "I'm starting to see that now." Samuel's shoulders relaxed incrementally. After a moment's hesitation, he leaned against her side, testing the contact. Eliza held perfectly still, afraid to shatter this fragile moment of trust. "Could I?" he began, then faltered. "Would it be all right if I stayed? Just until I fall." "Asleep again?" "Of course," Eliza murmured, scooting over to make room. "As long as you need." He settled beside her, still maintaining a careful distance but present, connected. Eliza began to hum softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung, the melody coming back to her across the years as if it had been waiting for this moment. Samuel's breathing gradually deepened and slowed. Just before sleep claimed him completely, he murmured something that stopped Eliza's heart. "Good night, Mama." The word hung in the darkness like a benediction. Eliza swallowed hard against the knot in her throat, afraid to acknowledge it, lest the moment shatter. But Samuel was already asleep. His face relaxed in a way she'd never seen before. "Good night, son," she whispered back, testing the word on her tongue, finding it fit. Days at Raven Creek Ranch stretched into weeks, then months. Winter descended on the Wyoming territory with majestic ferocity. Snowdrifts taller than a man, temperatures that froze breath mid-air, nights so clear and cold the stars seemed close enough to touch. Inside the ranch house, however, warmth prevailed, both the physical heat from crackling fireplaces and the more subtle warmth of human connection slowly being rebuilt. Eliza proved her worth a dozen times over. Her keen eye and steady hand made her invaluable during the fall roundup. Her ability to repair tack and mend harnesses saved the ranch precious dollars usually spent in town, and her willingness to stand night watch during the worst blizzards earned her the respect of even the most skeptical ranch hands. Samuel thrived in ways that sometimes left Eliza breathless with gratitude. The Harker's granddaughter Katie, a year younger and twice as mischievous, drew him out of his protective shell with the persistence of youth. Under Martha's patient tutelage, he discovered a talent for wood carving, his small hands crafting increasingly intricate figures from pine scraps. And with each passing day, the wariness in his eyes dimmed a little more, replaced by the curiosity and wonder that should have been his birthright. Their relationship grew in small moments, Samuel helping Eliza muck stalls without being asked, Eliza teaching him to track game through fresh snow, quiet evenings spent reading by the fire from Nathaniel's extensive library. The first time Samuel threw his arms around her without hesitation after a successful fishing expedition, Eliza had to turn away to hide tears of mingled joy and grief for all the embraces they'd lost. News from the outside world arrived sporadically, carried by the monthly supply wagon or occasional visitors hardy enough to brave mountain passes in winter. A letter from Marshal Holloway, carefully worded in case of interception, informed them that Judge Parsons had reviewed Caldwell's evidence and formally cleared Eliza of wrongdoing in most of the deaths attributed to the Widowmaker. Those few cases where innocent men had died would not be pursued, given the circumstances of her manipulation. "You're free," Nathaniel translated, reading between the lines of Holloway's careful prose. "At least in the eyes of the law, but freedom from legal consequences didn't equate to safety, as Holloway's next letter made clear. 3 of Amelia's closest associates had evaded capture. They were believed to be searching for Samuel, the only living witness who could identify other members of their network. What do we do now?" Samuel asked that night. After Eliza had explained the situation as gently as possible, they sat on the porch, despite the cold, watching the aurora borealis paint the sky in waves of green and purple light. The beauty seemed incongruous against the weight of their conversation. "We have options," Eliza replied, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "We could go further north into Canada, or east, lose ourselves in the cities. Or—" she hesitated. "Or?" Samuel prompted. "Or we stay here. Make a stand if they come." Eliza looked down at her hands, surprised to realize they weren't itching for her guns, as they once would have. "I'm tired of running from ghosts, Samuel. Tired of letting fear dictate our lives." He considered this, his young face solemn in the ethereal light from the sky. "Caldwell always said running keeps you alive, but it's not the same as living." "Smart man," Eliza murmured, her heart aching for all the conversations she'd never have with the person who'd saved her son's life. "If we stay," Samuel said carefully, "and they come, would you kill again?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Samuel knew what she had been, what she was capable of. The Widowmaker's reputation had reached even his young ears long before they'd met. Eliza considered her answer carefully. To protect you, yes, without hesitation. She turned to face him fully. But not like before, not driven by hate or vengeance, just love. Love, Samuel repeated softly, testing the word. Yes. Eliza felt the truth of it settle in her bones. I lost myself once to hatred. I won't make that mistake again, no matter what comes. Samuel nodded. Decision made. Then we stay. Spring came to the Wyoming Territory in fits and starts. Brilliant sunshine, followed by brutal snowstorms, fragile wildflowers pushing through melting drifts, creeks swollen with runoff from the mountains. The ranch burst into frenzied activity. After the long winter's relative quiet, calves needed branding, fences required repair after months of heavy snow, and the southern pastures had to be prepared for summer grazing. Eliza threw herself into the work, grateful for the physical exertion that left little energy for worry. Samuel divided his time between ranch chores, lessons with Martha, who'd been a schoolteacher in her youth, and increasingly adventurous explorations with Katie. Day by day, he reclaimed the childhood that had been stolen from him. The threat, hovering on the horizon, didn't disappear, but it gradually lost its power to dictate their power. The threat hovering on the horizon didn't disappear, but it gradually lost its power to dictate their every thought, every decision. Life established its own rhythm, healing both mother and son in ways neither had anticipated. One afternoon in late May, as Eliza mended tack in the shade of the stables, Nathaniel approached with an envelope in hand. "Ryder just brought this from town," he said, passing it to her. "Holloway's handwriting." Eliza set aside her work, wiping her hands before accepting the letter. The marshal's familiar scrawl covered the envelope, but something about it suggested urgency. She broke the seal with steady fingers, honed by years of handling more lethal tools. The message inside was brief, but devastating. "They found you. 3 riders asking questions in Coopersville described you and the boy with unsettling accuracy, heading your way, perhaps 3 days ahead of this letter. Stay or run, your choice, but be prepared either way." Bob Eliza folded the letter, carefully, her mind already calculating options, escape routes, defensive positions. "Bad news?" Nathaniel asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Company coming," she replied, her voice even despite the danger implied. "The unwelcome kind," the rancher nodded grimly. "How many?" 3, according to Holloway. Nathaniel's weathered face remained impassive. "Not terrible odds." "For me, no," Eliza agreed. "But I won't bring violence to your doorstep after all you've done for us." "This is our home," Nathaniel countered, his tone brooking no argument. "And you and the boy are under our protection while you're here. Any threat to you is a threat to us." The simple declaration caught Eliza off guard. Home, protection, family. Concepts she'd abandoned years ago, convinced they were forever beyond her reach. "Thank you," she said finally, the words inadequate but sincere. Nathaniel clapped her shoulder. "I'll alert the hands. Nothing obvious, but we'll have eyes watching." The approaches to the ranch. He started to leave, then paused. "The boy?" Eliza glanced toward the creek where Samuel and Katie were attempting to dam a small tributary with stones and branches. Their laughter carried across the ranch yard, bright and unburdened. "I'll tell him," she said. "Tonight. Let him have today." Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his eyes, then strode away to make preparations. Eliza returned to her mending, her hands moving mechanically while her mind raced through scenarios, contingencies, strategies. The widowmaker's skills, dormant but not forgotten, stirred within her. That night, after a subdued dinner during which the adults maintained a facade of normalcy for the children's sake, Eliza took Samuel for a walk along the ridge above the ranch. Stars pricked the vast Wyoming sky, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to echo Eliza's own apprehension. "They're coming, aren't they?" Samuel asked before she could find the right words. "Amelia's men." Eliza stopped, studying her son's face in the starlight. "How did you know?" He shrugged, trying for nonchalance but achieving only fragile bravado. "You've got that look again, the one you had at the Murphy place. So perceptive. This child who'd been forced to read adults' moods as a survival skill." Eliza didn't insult his intelligence with false reassurances. "Yes," she confirmed. "Holloway sent word. 3 riders, asking questions that were too specific to be coincidence." Samuel absorbed this, his gaze fixed on the ranch buildings below, warm lights glowing, in windows that had come to represent safety. "What do we do?" "We have choices," Eliza said, crouching to his eye level. "We can run again, find somewhere new, or we can stay and face what comes." She paused, watching his expression carefully. "But this time, it's our decision together. Not just mine." Samuel considered this, his young face solemn in the starlight. "If we run, we'll always be running," he said finally. "That's what Caldwell said near the end. That's why he stopped." Eliza nodded, a lump forming in her throat at this evidence of Caldwell's courage. "It's true, but staying means risk." "I know." Samuel's eyes met hers, steady despite the fear she could sense beneath his composure. "But this is home now. Katie, the Harkers, the horses I helped train." He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "I'm tired of losing homes." Pride and grief twisted in Eliza's chest. Pride at his courage, grief that he'd had to develop such steel so young. She reached out, brushing hair from his forehead in a gesture that had become familiar over the winter months. "Then we stay," she agreed softly. "Together." They spent the next 2 days in careful preparation. Nathaniel positioned his most trusted hands at strategic points around the ranch's perimeter. Martha cached supplies in the root cellar in case they needed to hole up. Samuel was never left alone, though they maintained enough normalcy that Katie remained blissfully unaware of the tension humming beneath the surface of daily activities. Eliza cleaned her Remingtons with meticulous care, checking the action, polishing each component until they functioned as smoothly as the day she'd purchased them. The familiar routine brought no pleasure now, only grim resignation. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that her days of violence were behind her. On the 3rd day, they came. Eliza was helping Samuel curry one of the yearlings when Nathaniel's foreman appeared at the stable door, his expression taut. "Riders coming up the South Road," he reported. 3 men, heavily armed. Don't recognize any of them." Eliza nodded, her body already shifting to a state of heightened awareness she hadn't accessed in months. "Get Samuel to the house," she instructed, handing the curry brush to the foreman. "Tell Martha it's time." As the man led Samuel away, the boy glanced back, fear and determination warring in his expression. "Be careful," he called. "Always," Eliza promised, retrieving her gun belt from where it hung on a peg near the tack room. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar as she buckled it around her waist. For months, she'd worn the guns only during hunting expeditions or target practice with Samuel. Now, adjusting the holsters with practiced ease, she felt the Widowmaker stirring within her, not consuming her as before, but lending cold clarity to her senses. She met Nathaniel on the front porch, where he sat in a rocking chair with a shotgun across his lap, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Martha stood in the doorway behind them, a Winchester, rifle held with the confidence of a woman who'd survived frontier life through competence rather than luck. "Samuel?" Eliza asked quietly. "Root cellar with Katie," Martha replied. "Told them it's a game. How long they can stay quiet while strangers visit." Eliza nodded, grateful for the older woman's pragmatism. Her gaze shifted to the south road, where 3 riders had now come into view, approaching at an unhurried pace that suggested confidence rather than caution. "Might be nothing," Nathaniel muttered, though his grip on the shotgun suggested he believed otherwise. "Might be," Eliza agreed, equally unconvinced. As the riders drew closer, details emerged. All 3 were trail-worn but well-equipped, their horses quality stock rather than rentals. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a distinctive scar, bisecting his left eyebrow, rode slightly ahead of his companions, one lean and fox-faced, the other bear-like with a bushy black beard. Something about the trio tugged at Eliza's memory. Then it clicked. A wanted poster she'd studied years ago, when the Widowmaker was still hunting. The Maddox brothers, hired guns who operated throughout the territories. Amelia had mentioned them once, calling them useful when precision isn't required. "I know them," she murmured to Nathaniel. "They're killers for hire, brutal ones." The rancher's expression hardened, but he maintained his relaxed posture as the riders approached the hitching post in front of the house. "Afternoon," he called, his tone friendly despite the shotgun resting conspicuously across his knees. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" The leader, Clay Maddox, if Eliza's memory served, smiled without warmth. "Hope so. We're looking for a woman and a boy who might have passed through these parts." His gaze slid to Eliza, recognition flaring in his eyes despite the changes months of ranch work had wrought in her appearance. "Those seems like we've found what we're looking for." Eliza stepped forward, interposing herself between the Maddox brothers and the house where her son hid. "You've had a long ride for nothing, then," she said evenly. "Whatever business you think you have here is finished." The youngest brother, fox-faced and twitchy, laughed, the sound grating. "Business ain't finished till we say it is, Widowmaker." "That name doesn't apply anymore," Eliza replied, her hands relaxed at her sides, though her awareness of her Remington's weight never wavered. "I suggest you turn around and ride out while you still can." Clay Maddox's smile faded. "Can't do that, Mom. Made a promise to a lady before she died. Said we'd tie up her loose ends if anything happened to her." His hand rested casually near his holster. "Boy's the only one who can identify the rest of our associates. Can't have him testifying to some territorial judge with a grudge against Enterprise." "The boy stays with me," Eliza stated, her voice dropping to a register that had once made hardened outlaws reconsider their life choices. "Your associate is dead. Whatever promises you made died with her." "And yet, here we are," Clay countered. "3 of us, 1 of you." "3, Martha corrected from the doorway, her rifle unwavering. "4, came Nathaniel's rumbling contribution. "7, added the foreman, emerging from the barn with 3 ranch hands, all armed. "We don't cotton to threats against our people." Clay's expression darkened as he reassessed the situation. Eliza could almost see the calculations behind his eyes. 7 armed opponents, defensible positions, uncertain odds. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "This isn't your fight. You made it our fight when you rode onto our land threatening." "Our family," Nathaniel replied, steel beneath his calm tone. "Family." The word hung in the air, simple and profound. Eliza felt its weight, its truth. These people, who'd taken in 2 strangers based on nothing more than a friend's recommendation, had woven her and Samuel into the fabric of their lives so subtly she'd hardly noticed it happening. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Clay Maddox made his decision, telegraphed by the slight shift of his weight in the saddle, the infinitesimal tightening of his gun hand. "Don't," Eliza warned, knowing it was futile. 3 things happened simultaneously. Clay went for his gun, the bearded brother reached for something in his saddlebag, and the fox-faced youngest turned his horse as if to flee. Eliza's Remingtons cleared leather with a speed and grace that belied their months of relative disuse. 2 shots rang out in such rapid succession they sounded like a single report. Clay, Maddox's gun hand exploded in a spray of blood and bone. The bearded brother howled as his shoulder shattered, the dynamite stick he'd been reaching for tumbling harmlessly to the dirt. Before the youngest could spur his horse to a gallop, Nathaniel's shotgun boomed, the spray of buckshot striking just ahead of the fleeing rider. The horse reared, dumping its rider unceremoniously into the mud of the ranch yard. And then it was over. 3 would-be killers disabled and disarmed in less time than it took to draw a deep breath. The ranch hands moved forward, relieving the wounded men of any remaining weapons while Martha dispatched the foreman to fetch rope and the doctor from the northern pasture. Eliza holstered her Remingtons with hands that remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. What surprised her most wasn't the familiar efficiency with which she'd responded to the threat, but the absence of satisfaction she felt looking at the wounded men. Once the Widowmaker would have gloried in her victory, feeding the hatred that sustained her. Now, Eliza felt only relief that the danger had passed, that her son was safe, that she hadn't had to kill again. Marshall in Coopersville will be mighty interested in these 3, Nathaniel observed, returning his shotgun to its resting position across his knees. They're wanted in 4 territories, if I recall the bulletins correctly. 5, Eliza corrected absently, her attention already shifting to the house. Samuel? I'll fetch the children, Martha offered, disappearing inside. Moments later, Samuel burst through the door, his face pale but determined. He skidded to a halt at the sight of the captured men, his eyes widening before seeking Eliza's face. "You're okay?" he demanded, scanning her for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him, kneeling to his level. "They can't hurt you now." Samuel studied the Maddox brothers with an intensity beyond his years, then turned back to Eliza. "You didn't kill them." It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "No, they'll face justice for their crimes, but not at my hands. Not like that." Something in Samuel's expression lightened, as if a shadow he'd carried lifted slightly. "Good," he said simply, then threw his arms around her neck with a fierceness that stole her breath. Eliza held him close, breathing in the scent of pine sap and wood smoke that clung to his clothes, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against hers. Over his shoulder, she met Martha's knowing gaze. "Choices," the older woman mouthed silently, approval clear in her eyes. "Yes," Eliza thought, tightening her embrace as Samuel's breathing gradually steadied against her. Choices made not from hatred or fear, but from love. Choices that broke the cycle of violence rather than perpetuating it. Choices that honored James's memory, Caldwell's sacrifice, and the second chance they'd been granted against all odds. By the time Marshal Davies arrived from Coopersville to take custody of the Maddox brothers, life at Raven Creek Ranch had already begun returning to its normal rhythms. The spring carving continued unabated. Samuel resumed his wood-carving projects. Katie's experiments with training a wolf pup, found abandoned in the foothills, provided endless entertainment and occasional chaos. The only visible change was the letter Eliza wrote to Judge Parsons, formally testifying to everything she'd witnessed regarding Amelia's criminal network. She included details Samuel had shared about the associates he could identify, ensuring that even if they couldn't be present at trials, justice would still have its chance. "Think this'll be the end of it?" Nathaniel asked as they watched the marshal's wagon disappear down the south road, carrying the Maddox brothers to face charges that would likely see them hang. Eliza considered the question, her hand absently touching the worn grips of her Remington. "No," she answered honestly. "There will always be others, men like the Maddoxes, people who think violence is the answer to everything." "And you?" the rancher pressed. "Will you be ready if they come?" Eliza's gaze drifted to the creek bank where Samuel sat with Katie, teaching her to whittle a simple figure from pine. His head was bent in concentration, sunlight catching in his hair. So like James's, it made her heart ache with bittersweet recognition. "I'll be ready," she confirmed quietly. "But not like before, not as the Widowmaker." She turned to Nathaniel, seeing understanding in his weathered face. "Just as a mother protecting her child, as part of this family you've given us." The rancher nodded, satisfaction in his expression. "Good enough," he pronounced, clapping her shoulder before ambling toward the barn where a new foal had just arrived. That evening, as twilight painted the Wyoming sky in shades of lavender and gold, Eliza and Samuel sat on the porch swing, companionable silence between them. In the distance, the Bighorn Mountains stood sentinel, their peaks still snow-capped despite the warming days. "Do you think they'll come again?" Samuel asked finally, his voice holding curiosity rather than fear. "Other men like the Maddoxes?" Eliza considered lying, offering platitudes about safety and certainty, but their relationship had been built on hard-won truth. She wouldn't dishonor it now. "Probably," she admitted. "Eventually, but less likely as time passes and Amelia's organization falls apart." She reached over to straighten his collar, a maternal gesture that had become natural over the past months. "And we'll be ready if they do." Samuel nodded, absorbing this. Then, with the resilience of youth, he changed directions. "Entirely. I've been thinking about names," he said, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Since we might stay here, since it's home now." Eliza cocked her head, puzzled. "Names. Well," Samuel continued, suddenly shy. "I've been Samuel Caldwell for as long as I can remember, but that's not really my name, is it?" Understanding dawned. In the chaos of their reunion and subsequent flight, they'd never discussed the simple matter of what he should be called. He'd remained Samuel Caldwell by unspoken agreement, a final tribute to the man who'd saved his life. "No," Eliza agreed, gently. "Your father's name was James Blackwood. You were born James Samuel Blackwood, after your father and grandfather." Samuel tested the name silently, his lips forming the unfamiliar syllables. "James Samuel Blackwood," he repeated aloud. "That's who I was supposed to be." "You already are," Eliza assured him. "A name doesn't define you. Your actions do, your choices." "Like yours?" he asked, surprising her with his perceptiveness. "Everyone called you the Widowmaker, but that's not who you are anymore." "No," Eliza agreed, emotion thickening her voice. "Not anymore." Samuel leaned against her side, comfortable in a way that would have been unimaginable months ago. "I think," he said slowly, "I'd like to be Samuel James Blackwood, to remember both of them, father and Caldwell. Is that all right?" Eliza rapped, her arm around his shoulders, drawing him closer as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "It's perfect," she whispered, and it was. Perfect in its symmetry, its acknowledgement of the past while embracing the future. Perfect in its honoring of two men who'd loved this boy enough to die for him. Perfect in its claiming of a legacy nearly destroyed by hatred and vengeance. As night settled over Raven Creek Ranch, as lights glowed warm in windows and distant, coyotes called to one another across the valley. Eliza Blackwood and her son, Samuel James Blackwood, remained on the porch, plotting constellations and planning tomorrow's adventures with the quiet certainty of those who have weathered the worst storms and emerged against all odds into unexpected sunlight. The Widowmaker was gone. In her place, a mother remained, scarred but healing, vigilant but at peace, ready to protect what she loved not through vengeance, but through the fiercer, steadier courage that comes from knowing exactly what you stand to lose and choosing love anyway. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Don't miss